Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about friction and friction applications. So the basic concept in the chapter is the idea of dry friction. So dry friction is where we have two solid objects in contact, and the dry friction is the force that would resist them sliding relative to one another. So the other version of friction would be fluid friction, which we're not going to examine in this course. Because that involves a lot more fluid mechanics than we want to get into. So friction, of course, is one of the types of forces. It's one of the more complicated ones we're going to have to deal with. And we're going to look at all the different friction applications as well. So the first friction application we're going to talk about is the idea of slipping versus tipping. So this is the idea when you push on an object and it's on a rough surface. You can push harder and harder, and eventually one of two things is going to happen. The object is either going to start to slide along the surface, it's going to be the slipping part, or the object is going to tip over due to the friction forces. And so the key with this is we need to understand dry friction, and we need to understand the couples that are going to be at work that are going to cause either the tipping motion or the couples aren't going to be enough to cause tipping motion. We're just going to end up with sliding first. Alright, so additionally we also are going to talk about wedges. And so if we have a wedge-shaped object and we are kind of pressing that into some space, trying to separate two objects to bigger objects, that's going to involve a lot of friction, and it's going to be the main force we need to overcome in order to make the wedge work like we want it to work. So if we think about a wedge that is wrapped around a cylindrical shaft, that's basically what we have for screws, and for power screws in particular. So a power screw is a shaft with a screw thread on it that is used to usually run some object up or down the shaft. And so we've got some torque we apply, we've got some friction, and we have basically the same system we would have with wedges, just kind of wrapped around in a circular fashion. So also with dry friction, we're going to be worried about bearing friction. So bearing friction is if we have a shaft in some sort of sleeve and we have some rotating shaft in sort of that inside of that sleeve. We're going to have some friction there. It's going to be kind of a variation of dry friction. And we want to be able to understand that because we use these bearings often in machines. We've also got disc friction. So this is where we have the end of a shaft, so a circular area that is rotating against some stationary surface. So again, since we've got two things that are sliding relative to one another, we've got some dry friction. So this is going to be important again for certain types of bearings where we have the end of the shaft in contact with the surface. And also sometimes we don't maximize this with something like the disc brakes in your car. Is going to be an application of disc friction, and that we want to maximize because we want the car to stop. So the last friction application we're going to be talking about is belt friction. And so when we have two pulleys and we connect those two pulleys with the belt is actually going to transmit some torque from one shaft to another via the friction between the pulleys and the belt. So this is another application, although not so straightforward, application of the idea of dry friction. Because if the friction in the belt gets too large, we're going to end up with the belt slipping. When the belt starts to slip, we're not effectively transmitting power from one shaft to the next anymore. So that's what we're going to be discussing in this chapter. We basically have dry friction and all the applications, separate applications of this. So thank you for listening, and I will see you again.